Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. When I was in my 20s, I got the chance to watch a movie that I had been hearing about for a very long time. This movie was my father's all-time favorite, so I remember from a very early age hearing about the tremendous impact that it had had on him. This is it. Kon Ichikawa's 1956 masterpiece, The Burmese Harp, Biruma no Tategoto. It is an amazing film. When I had the chance to watch it, it completely blew me away. But then when I found out that it was based on a novel, I just had to get the novel and read it because that's the way that I function. So I got a copy of it. It's very, very slim. It is titled as a novel Harp of Burma, and the author is Michio Takeyama. So what I did was I decided to reread it and then to watch the movie because I wanted to share my ideas on it with you. But also listen to this. There just so happens to be an anime version of the Harp of Burma, or the Burmese harp. It's part of this animated classics of Japanese literature series. So I'm going to throw this in this video also, and I'll tell you a little bit about that anime version too. So first of all, let's look a little bit at info on the author, and it's going to be very brief because we don't have a whole lot of information about Michio Takeyama. He was born in 1903 and he passed away in 1984. He was a literary critic, teacher. He was also, of course, a writer, but he was a scholar of German literature. And as a matter of fact, he translated some classics of German literature into Japanese. Two authors that I remember mentioned as some of the ones that he had translated are Goethe and Nietzsche. So very important stuff here that we are talking about. Now, as an author, at least outside of Japan, and I am pretty sure that this is the case in Japan too, he's kind of a one-hit wonder with Harp of Burma. And I would even say that today, chances are that those readers who arrive at this novel probably do so after having watched the film by Kon Ichikawa. That was definitely the case for me, as I told you before. So I just wanted to mention that. So let me tell you a little bit now about the novel itself. Harp of Burma was serialized first. It was in 1946 that this was published for the first time, and it was serialized in a publication that was directed towards younger readers. But the thing is, adults read the novel and they became fans of it also because it resonated with them. It's an anti-war novel, one of many that were published in Japan right after World War II. And it is very brief. It's really 120 pages long only. The story is divided into three parts, and then those three parts have several chapters to them. And then regarding the style, I would say that it reads as a testimony. It really reads as something that was experienced by the person who's telling the story. It's a personal account, and because of that, it makes use of the first person. But here's the interesting thing. We have both first person singular and first person plural. That's one of the many things that I found about this novel that I thought were interesting and made it a really good reading experience for me. So looking at the story itself, the novel begins with a little introduction from the author, who tells us that this is a story that he heard from a soldier. And then after that we hear the soldier story. This soldier is the narrator, and he remains unnamed throughout the text. He is the one who uses the first person plural quite a bit, so you get that we type of narration for the most part of the novel. And then right after that, after the introduction from the author, we have the first part, which is titled The Singing Company. You can imagine what this does. Okay, it introduces us to the characters, it tells us a little bit about the setting, the story itself, but this company of soldiers have a particular thing about them. They are always singing, so it's not the kind of thing that you would expect. But in any case, when you look at this company of soldiers, there is one of them who really stands out, and his name is Mitsushima. This is the center of the story of the Harp of Burma. He is the one who plays the harp. So in this first part, I was very surprised to find a sense of merriment. There's a lot of singing and dancing, some descriptions of local customs. And at one point, the Japanese soldiers even run into a company of British soldiers. And here's the interesting thing, when the British soldiers hear the song that the Japanese soldiers are singing, they respond with the same song, because it turns out that it was a song originally in English. So they all sing together and all is well, pretty much. At one point, everybody learns that Japan has surrendered. So all of a sudden, the Japanese soldiers become prisoners of war. And that marks the first turning point in this narrative. That's where part two begins. The title of part two is The Green Parakeet. If you have seen the movie, you know that this is a very important symbol in the story. And this part is the longest, and it tells us about the experience of the POWs for the most part. So at the beginning of the second part, Mitsushima is sent on a mission. It turns out that at a peak, there's a group of Japanese soldiers who refuse to surrender, and the British are about to kill them all, basically. So Mitsushima is sent there to tell them, look, we have surrendered as a nation, so it would be a good idea to, stop fighting. But this is a group of soldiers who have the philosophy that it is better to die fighting. So it's a very difficult mission for him. He leaves. And for the rest of the novel, what's going to happen is that his friends are going to feel that absence. He leaves a void behind when he goes on this mission. So one day, what happens is that the soldiers see a Buddhist monk who looks very much like Mitsushima. So they're like, this is really strange, right? So what this introduces to the novel is that sense of mystery that characterizes it. There's this idea trying to find out, who is this monk? Why does he look so much like Mitsushima? Everybody is wondering that. And then the final part of the novel, without spoiling anything, is titled The Monk's Letter. And that recounts what happened to Mitsushima and also tells us a little bit of how the story of the soldiers continues. There are some really, really big and heavy themes in this very slim novel. The first one that you're going to encounter is Japan versus Burma. So according to this author, that would be effectiveness, quote unquote, and spirituality, on the other hand, represented by the Burmese people. There's also the important theme of purpose, of duty, the importance of finding that purpose in life. This really is the story of a person who finds that call, right? What it is that I need to do in order to give meaning to my life. And that is directly related to the next theme that I found, which is self-sacrifice. That's something obvious that you're going to find here. But there are many more, okay? Another example is the liberating power of art. This is obviously a novel about music. So not only about how beautiful music can be, but how it can help us to cope and how it can help us to connect with other human beings. The need for comradeship, that's also very important. The need for friendship, especially when we're going through a difficult time. And then the last one, which becomes prominent more towards the end of the story, is the importance of spirituality. The idea of this author is that the life of the senses, the physical life, the life where you focus on something like being effective, for example, is all fine, but you need more than that, right? We need something that is transcendent. That is what this author tells us through this story. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you a couple of passages that I found to be interesting, and then I'll just give you some conclusions about the novel, and we can move on to talk about the film adaptations. So on page 33 I found this. I remembered how stirred and excited we had been when we left Japan with cheers ringing in our ears, but how even so the whole country already seemed to be in an uneasy mood. Everybody was bragging about our strength, but our words were hollow. We were like drunken bullies. It was a vivid, painful memory, and I burned with shame. So you can imagine how this was read in 1946. It really reminded me of another great war novel, All Quiet on the Western Front. So there are many connections with that work and of course with other war novels. And the next thing that I have for you is towards the end. So I have something from the beginning and something from the end. And one of the characters here says, I was harassed by tormenting questions. Why does so much misery exist in the world? Why is there so much inexplicable suffering? What are we to think? But I have learned that these questions can never be solved by human thought. We must work to bring what little relief we can to this pain-ridden world. We must be brave. No matter what suffering, what unreasonableness, what absurdity we face, we must remain undaunted and show strength of character by meeting it with tranquility. So another thing that I like about this text is that it doesn't provide easy answers, as you can tell from that passage that I read. So I would say, as a conclusion, Harp of Burma is really a page turner. Okay, I read it in a couple of days because I started it at night, so I finished it the following day. You can probably read it in a couple of hours, so I would say definitely check it out, because this is a very rare novel. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in the sense that it is both a deeply spiritual and a deeply humanistic story. To me, those are not mutually exclusive, but they are very difficult and very hard to find in one book. So that to me is reason enough already to read it. So we're going to look now at the film adaptation by Kon Ichikawa, which is from 1956, so exactly 10 years after the publication of the novel. This is an adaptation that is faithful to the novel, except for a couple of things. There's a change in the structure, and there's also a part that has been omitted from that is present in the novel that you're not going to find in the film. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. Now, music plays obviously a very important part in this story. So this is a story that when you read it, you not only want to see it, you want to hear it also. So no matter how good the descriptions of the music are in the novel, there's just nothing like having the experience of listening to that music. And the music in this film is deeply moving. And I am referring both to the diegetic and the non-diegetic music that is featured in this film. So that would be, to me, an obvious improvement, if you want to call it that, and that, you know, the story gains when it is translated into film or adapted. I told you there's a very important change with the structure. Okay, so this is it. Instead of showing us the story of the soldiers and then the story of the monk through the letter, what the movie does is that at one point it begins to alternate between those two options. Great improvement. Okay, it is much smoother storytelling, and it also seems a lot less artificial than what you get in the novel. Not that the novel doesn't read well or anything like that, but in film it just functions so much better. That means, on the other hand, that the element of mystery is not as prominent in the film. When you read the story, that last part, the monk's letter, that really comes as a revelation. You don't really have that in the film. And also the turning point of the novel, which is that scene where the character sees those corpses next to the woods. If you have seen the film or read the novel, you know what I'm talking about. That happens closer to the beginning of the story in the film because of that structural change that was made. And then I told you also that there's an episode that has been excised from the film. That is an episode dealing with cannibalism, and they completely omitted that. And I think that's in fact a very good choice. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this when we look at the anime version too. So another element that I enjoyed about the movie is the photography. I would say look out for those landscapes. Okay, and I don't mean just the beautiful landscapes, I mean the barren landscapes also. Both of those are very well done. There are also many images of temples, and I really like those because they are quite inspiring and they add to the spiritual, uplifting quality of this film, which I think is also part of the novel. The acting is excellent, absolutely excellent, even though most of the actors, at least for me, were not recognizable. The only actor that I recognized, the only face that I saw there that I was like, oh yes, I have seen this guy before, was Ko Nishimura. He worked with Kurosawa, with Imamura, with Kobayashi. He was in The Bad Sleep Well by Kurosawa, and I believe also in Yojimbo. And then he did Intentions of Murder with Imamura. And with Kobayashi, I believe he did Fountainhead. So we're talking about very important movies right here. But as I said, that was the only actor that I recognized. And Shoji Yasui, who is the guy who played Mitsushima, he's simply brilliant. It's great acting, but believe it or not, that was his major role ever. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Then after that, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so we have Kon Ichikawa's version, which is in the Criterion Collection. And I showed you before this anime version. This one was released in 1986, so we are talking 30 years after the Ichikawa version, 40 years after the novel was published. And it is 2 episodes of the animated classics of Japanese literature. It has, because it was released in the 80s, that wonderful old school quality, that style that you can find in anime from the 80s and the 70s, which I absolutely love because it really takes me back to my childhood. And unlike the Ichikawa film, I thought this was interesting. The anime version goes back to the original structure of the novel. And in this case, it really works. Okay, if you have a film that is almost 2 hours long, like the Ichikawa film is, then following the structure of the novel could be problematic, and that is probably the reason why they decided to alter that structure. But the animated classics of Japanese literature, each chapter, each episode was about less than 25 minutes long. This is a double feature, but still, we're talking less than 50 minutes long. So you can still follow the structure of the novel, and it works very well. So I was happy to see that. Interestingly, they also omit the cannibalism episode. When I say cannibalism, it sounds like really, really serious and grim and all that. But in the novel, this is in fact a humorous episode. But I thought that it was out of place in the novel. If there's one thing that I would criticize about the novel, it's probably that. So I think it was a good choice to get rid of that part, because in the context of the novel, Burma represents spirituality. So you see what I mean? It doesn't really make much sense to include that, even if it is a humorous episode that the other characters comment on in the novel. So I thought it was a very good decision to do that. I absolutely loved the music in the animated version, and I'm going to say more than that. I liked the music here even better than I did in the Ichikawa film. Of course, here we're talking about 1986, so maybe that has something to do with that. Koichi Sakata is the name of the guy who was in charge of the music. So I want to give him credit because I thought the music was just excellent. So overall, this is just a beautiful adaptation by Noboru Ishiguro. I think it's perfect. I can't find any reason to complain about it. So if you get the chance to watch it, of course, I think you're gonna like it, especially if you're into anime in that 70s, 80s kind of style that I was mentioning before. So, the bottom line. I don't need to tell you that Kon Ichikawa's film is brilliant. You probably already know that. But what many people do not know is that the novel is quite excellent too. I was very pleasantly surprised by this little novel. And also the anime version is quite touching. So we have here a story that has exploded into many different types of expression. And I think it's really a very good one. I hope, and I'm pretty sure you do too, that someday we're not going to need, war novels or war movies anymore. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's going to be anytime soon. So I would say that in the meantime, these are stories that really remind us that there's a very important aspect of the human experience that could use improvement. If you ask me personally, I think if war solved any problems, this should probably be a perfect world by now, and that is hardly the case. So, I mean, I don't know, just read the book. I highly recommend it. Watch the movie, watch the anime, and let's just try to do our little part, when it comes to alleviating the suffering of this world. I think that we can all do something about improving that aspect of things, and anything we do, even if it is a little thing, is already a great improvement. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on that. So, those are my thoughts on Harp of Burma, the Burmese Harp by Michio Takayama, the novel, the adaptation by Kon Ichikawa, and also the anime version by Noboru Ishiguro. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, or recipes. I always love getting your comments and responding to them. So that's always wonderful, and you can always count on a response from me. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.